What's up, everyone? Please take a second to hit that like button. The more likes that we get in a short period of time, the more people the algorithm will bring into the chat to hang out with us and see what's going on. Hopefully they don't make us sit here and wait for a long period of time and then call another recess like they just did. Thank you guys for being here. We'll see how this goes. Thank you so much, Callie and Sandra, for joining the membership program, and welcome to the family. You're officially hooligans. Well, it looks like the toaster is talking to the defense. Hey, thank you so much, Michael, for your donation and all your support. I really appreciate you. And thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate you. Thank you guys for being here. What's up, Tat and Blue? What's up, TPS? Callie, you'll be able to tell what the toaster is when it goes up there and speaks. It's the giant thing on the screen wearing green. I hope you guys are ready. There's going to be some hardcore lying and crying going on. They had to go poll witnesses and all of that. I'm sure they had to take that recess so they could get everybody trained and get their stories straight, get some grooming in. Not Raskin, he ain't grooming at all. He's rocking that same hairdo for the last 3 days now. It's tough. It's tough stuff. Hey, thank you so much, Patriots United. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much. Come on, everyone. Let's get those likes up. If we can get a whole bunch of likes all at once, YouTube will put the channel in front of viewers and stuff. Let's get that chat filled up so everybody can see the lying and crying, all the craziness going on, so they can watch it live before CNN gets it and doctors it all up and starts cutting it together to structure sentences that never happened and all of that. They better get their stuff together. I don't want them calling another recess. That stuff is ridiculous. We sat there for about an hour. And they're like, you know what? I think we should call a recess. And then took 45 minutes on top of the hour. How long does it take to fabricate witnesses? Hey, thank you so much, Marlene, for your donation, all your support. I really appreciate you. And thank you, Jordan, for joining the membership program, and welcome to the family. You're officially a hooligan. Hey, thank you so much, Christina, for your donation and all your support. I appreciate you.
Senate will be in order. Majority Leader, without objection, so ordered. Ms. Vanderveen? No. Mr. Castor, I'm sorry.
May I be recognized?
Yes, you are. You are recognized.
Nobody knows what's going on.
Senators,
Glasses all fucked up.
Donald John Trump, by his counsel, is prepared to stipulate that if Representative Herrera Butler were to testify under oath as part of these proceedings, her testimony would be consistent with the statement she issued on February 12, 2021, and the former president's counsel is agreeable to the admission of that public statement into evidence at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Castor. Mr. Raskin?
Thank you, Mr. President. The managers are prepared to enter into the agreement. I will now read the statement. This is the statement of Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler, February 12, 2021. In my January 12th statement in support of the article of impeachment, I referenced a conversation House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy relayed to me that he'd had with President Trump while the January 6th attack was ongoing. Here are the details. When McCarthy finally reached the president on January 6th and asked him to publicly and forcefully call off the riot, the president initially repeated the falsehood that it was Antifa that had breached the Capitol. McCarthy refuted that and told the president that these were Trump supporters. That's when, according to McCarthy, the president said, "Well, Kevin, I guess these people are more upset about the election than you are." Since I publicly announced my decision to vote for impeachment, I have shared these details in countless conversations with constituents and colleagues and multiple times through the media and other public forums. I told it to the Daily News of Longview on January 17th. I've shared it with local county Republican executive board members, as well as other constituents who asked me to explain my vote. I shared it with thousands of residents on my telephone town hall on February 8th. Mr. President, I now move that the Senate admit the statement into evidence.
Objection, and without objection, the statement will be admitted into evidence. And does either party wish to make any further motions related to witnesses or documents at this time?
Well, that's the first time they've actually said Antifa.
The President's counsel have no further motions.
Discussion.
And Mr. President, we have no further motions either.
Excuse me, then the chair would note that neither party wishes to make further motions under Section 6 of Senate Resolution 47. Therefore, the next question is on admission of the evidence submitted by both parties pursuant to Section 8 of the resolution. The majority leaders recommend.
So now, as we move to another matter, I'm advised that the House managers have no objection to the admission of evidence proposed to be admitted by the former President's counsel under the provisions of Section 8 of Senate Resolution 47, and that the President's counsel have no objections to the evidence proposed to be admitted into evidence by the House managers. Pursuant to Section 8 of the resolution, as agreed to by Leader McConnell and myself a few days ago, both parties have made timely filings of this evidence with the Secretary of the Senate and have provided copies to each other. I therefore ask unanimous consent that the Senate dispense with the provisions of Section 8A of Senate Resolution 47, and that the materials submitted by both parties be admitted into evidence, subject to the provisions of Section 8C of that resolution, which provides that the admission of this evidence does not constitute a concession by either party as to the truth of the matters asserted by the other party, and that each senator shall decide for him or herself the weight to be given such evidence. This request has the approval of both parties and the Republican leader.
Without objection, is so ordered. Okay, then pursuant to the provisions of Senate Resolution 47, the Senate has provided for up to 4 hours of closing arguments. They'll be equally divided between the managers on the part of the House of Representatives and the counsel for the former president. And pursuant to Rule 22 of the Rules of Procedure and Practice in the Senate, when sitting on impeachment trials, the argument shall be open and closed on the part of the House of Representatives. So the chair recognizes Mr. Manager Raskin to begin the presentation on the part of the House of Representatives. Mr. Raskin, under Rule 22, you may reserve time if you wish.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate, before I proceed, it was suggested by defense counsel that Donald Trump's conduct during the attack, as described in Congresswoman Butler's statement, is somehow not part of the constitutional offense for which former President Trump has been charged. I want to reject that falsehood and that fallacy immediately. After he knew that violence was underway at the Capitol, President Trump took actions that further incited the insurgents to be more inflamed and to take even more extreme, selective, and focused action against Vice President Mike Pence. Former President Trump also, as described by Congresswoman Butler's notes, refused requests to publicly, immediately, and forcefully call off the riots. And when he was told that the insurgents inside the Capitol were Trump supporters, the president said, quote, "Well, Kevin, I guess these people are more upset about the election than you are." Think about that for a second. This uncontradicted statement that has just been stipulated as part of the evidentiary record. The president said, "Well, Kevin, I guess these people," meaning the mobsters, the insurrectionists, "are more upset about the election than you are." That conduct is obviously part and parcel of the constitutional offense that he was impeached for, namely incitement to insurrection. That is continuing incitement to the insurrection. The conduct described not only perpetuated his continuing offense, but also provides to us here today further decisive evidence of his intent to incite the insurrection in the first place. When my opposing counsel says that you should ignore the president's actions after the insurrection began, that is plainly wrong. And it, of course, reflects the fact that they have no defense to his outrageous, scandalous, and unconstitutional conduct in the middle of a violent assault on the Capitol that he incited. Senators, think about it for a second. Say you light a fire, and you're charged with arson. And the defense counsel says, everything that I did after the fire started is irrelevant. And the court would reject that immediately and say, that's not true at all. It's extremely relevant to whether or not you committed the crime. If you run over and try to put out the flames, if you get lots of water and say, help, help, there's a fire, if you call for help, a court will could infer that you didn't intend for the fire to be lit in the first place. They would accept your defense, perhaps, that it was all an accident. It was an all accident. Accidents happen with fire. But if, on the other hand, when the fire erupts, you go and you pour more fuel on it. You stand by and you watch it gleefully. Any reasonable person will infer that you not only intended the fire to start, but that once it got started and began to spread, you intended to continue to keep the fire going. And that's exactly where we are, my friends. Of course your conduct while a crime is ongoing is relevant to your culpability, both to the continuation of the offense, but also directly relevant, directly illuminating to what your purpose was originally. What was your intent? And any court in the land would laugh out of court any criminal defendant who said, what I did after I allegedly killed that person is irrelevant to whether or not I intended to kill them. I mean, come on. Donald Trump's refusal not only to send help, but also to continue to further incite the insurgents against his own vice president. His own vice president provides further decisive evidence of both his intent to start this violent insurrection and his continued incitement once the attack had begun to override the Capitol. All right. Senators, that was in response to this new evidentiary particle that came in. But in my closing, I want to thank you for your remarkable attention and your seriousness of purpose befitting your office. We have offered you overwhelming and irrefutable and certainly unrefuted evidence that former President Trump incited this insurrection against us. To quote the statement Representative Liz Cheney made in January, quote, on January 6, 2021, a violent mob attacked the United States Capitol to obstruct the process of our democracy and stop the counting of presidential electoral votes. This insurrection caused injury, death, and destruction in the most sacred space in our republic. She continued. Representative Cheney continued. Much more will become clear in coming days and weeks, but what we know now is enough. The President of the United States summoned this mob, assembled this mob, and lit the flame of this attack. Everything that followed was his doing. None of this would have happened without the President. The President could have immediately and forcefully intervened to stop the violence. He did not. There has never been a greater betrayal by the President of the United States of his office and his oath to the Constitution. I will vote to impeach the President. Representative Cheney was right. She based her vote on the facts, on the evidence, and on the Constitution. And the evidence, the video, documentary, eyewitness has only grown stronger and stronger and more detailed right up till today, right up to 10 minutes ago, over the course of this Senate trial. And I have no doubt that you all noticed that despite the various propaganda reels and so on, President Trump's lawyers have said almost nothing to contest or overcome the actual evidence of former President Trump's conduct that we presented, much less have they brought their client forward to tell us his side of the story. We sent him a letter last week, which they rejected out of hand. The former President of the United States refused to come and tell us, and I ask any of you, if you were charged with inciting violent insurrection against our country, and you were falsely accused, would you come and testify? I know I would. I'd be there at 7 o'clock in the morning waiting for the doors to open. I'm sure that's true of 100 senators in this room. I hope it's true of 100 senators in this room. Senate was lectured several times yesterday about cancel culture. Well, not even 2 weeks ago, the president's most reliable supporters in the House, I'm sorry, not the president, the former president's most reliable supporters in the House tried to cancel out Representative Cheney because of her courageous and patriotic defense of the Republic and the truth and the Constitution. They tried to strip her of her leading role as chair of the House Republican Conference. But you know what? I hope everybody takes a second to reflect on this. The conference rejected this plainly retaliatory and cowardly attempt to punish her for telling the truth to her constituents and her country and voting for impeachment. Who says you can't stand up against bullies? Who says? In my mind, Liz Cheney is a hero for standing up for the truth and resisting this retaliatory cancel culture that she was subjected to. But she beat them on a vote of 145 to 61, more than 2-to-1 vote. You know, Ben Franklin, a great champion of the Enlightenment, an enemy of political fanaticism and cowardice, and of course another great Philadelphian, once wrote this: I have observed that wrong is always growing more wrong until there is no bearing it anymore, and that right, however opposed, comes right at last. Comes right at last. Think about that. This is America, home of the brave, land of the free. The America of Ben Franklin, who said, if you make yourself a sheep, the wolves will eat you. Don't make yourself a sheep. The wolves will eat you. The America of Thomas Jefferson, who said at another difficult moment, a little patience and we shall see the reign of witches pass over, their spirits dissolve, and the people, recovering their true sight, restore their government to its true principles. The America of Tom Paine, who said, the mind, once enlightened, cannot again become dark. Now, we showed you hour after hour of real-time evidence demonstrating every step of Donald Trump's constitutional crime. We showed you how he indoctrinated the mob with his Orwellian propaganda about how the election he lost by more than 7 million votes and 306 to 232 in the electoral college, which he had described as a landslide when he won by the exact same margin in 2016, was actually a landslide victory for him being stolen away by a bipartisan conspiracy and fraud and corruption. We showed you how 61 courts and 88 judges, federal, state, local, trial, appellate, from the lowest courts in the land to the United States Supreme Court across the street, and 8 federal judges he himself named to the bench, all found no basis in fact or law for his outlandish and deranged inventions and concoctions about the election. In the meantime, President Trump tried to bully state-level officials to commit a fraud on the public by literally finding votes. We examined the case study of Georgia, where he called to threaten Republican Brad Raffensperger to find him 11,780 votes. That's all he wanted, he said. 11,780 votes. Don't we all? 11,780 votes. That's all he wanted to nullify Biden's victory and to win the election. Raffensperger ended up with savage death threats against him and his family, telling him he deserved a firing squad. Another election official urged Trump to cut it out or people would get hurt and killed. A prescient warning indeed. Raffensperger ended up saying that he and his family supported Donald Trump, gave him money, and now Trump threw us under the bus. We saw what happened in Lansing, Michigan, with the extremist mob he cultivated, which led to 2 shocking Capitol sieges and a criminal conspiracy by extremists to kidnap and likely assassinate Governor Whitmer. We saw him trying to get state legislatures to disavow and overthrow their popular election results and replace them with Trump electors. We showed you the process of summoning the mob, reaching out, urging people to come to Washington for a wild time. As we celebrate President's Day on Monday, imagine, is there another president in our history who would urge supporters to come to Washington for a wild time? You saw how he embraced the violent extremist elements like the Proud Boys, who were told in a nationally televised presidential candidate debate to stand back and stand by, which became their official slogan as they converged on Washington with other extremist and seditious groups and competed to be the lead stormtroopers of the attack on this building. You saw the assembly of the mob on January 6th, and how beautiful that angry mob must have looked to Donald Trump as he peered down from the lectern with the seal of the President of the United States of America emblazoned on it. That crowd was filled with extremists in tactical gear, armed to the teeth and ready to fight, and other brawling MAGA supporters. All of them saying, "Stop the steal right now." And he said he was going to march with them to the Capitol, even though the permit for the rally specifically forbade a march. But he said he would march with them, giving them more comfort that what they were doing was legitimate. It was okay. But of course, he stayed back, as he presumably didn't want to be too close to the action at the Capitol, as the lawyers called it. Not an insurrection, they urged us yesterday. It's an action. He didn't want to be too close to the action when all hell was about to break loose. Now, incitement, as we've discussed, requires an inherently fact-based evidentiary inquiry. And this is what we did. We gave you many hours of specific factual details about, to use Congresswoman Cheney's words, how the president summoned the mob, assembled the mob, incited it, lit the match, sending them off to the Capitol, where they thought, as they yelled out, that they'd been invited by the President of the United States. And then, of course, they unleashed unparalleled violence against our overwhelmed and besieged but heroic police officers, who you thoughtfully honored yesterday when the officers got in their way as they entered the Capitol at the behest of the President of the United States to stop the steal. Now, I'm convinced most senators must be convinced by this overwhelming and specific detail, because most Americans are. But say you still have your doubts. You think the president really thought that he was sending his followers to participate in a peaceful, nonviolent rally, the kind that might have been organized by Julian Bond, who my distinguished opposing counsel brought up, Ella Baker, Bob Moses, our late beloved colleague John Lewis, for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Maybe the president really thought this was going to be like the March on Washington organized by Bayard Rustin and Dr. Martin Luther King, who said nonviolence is the answer to the crucial moral and political questions of our time. So let's say you're still flirting with the idea that Donald Trump's conduct was totally appropriate, as he proclaimed right off the bat, and he's the innocent victim of a mass accident or catastrophe like a fire or a flood, as we were invited to frame it on our opening day by distinguished co-counsel or opposing counsel. And you think, maybe we're just looking for somebody to blame for this nightmare and catastrophe that has befallen the Republic. We're just looking for someone to blame. Well, here's the key question then in resolving your doubts, if you're in that category. How did Donald Trump react when he learned of the violent storming of the Capitol and the threats to senators, members of the House, and his own vice president, as well as the images he saw on TV of the pummeling and beating and harassment of our police officers? Did he spring into action to stop the violence and save us? Did he even wonder about his own security, since an out-of-control anti-government mob could come after him too? Did he quickly try to get in touch with or denounce the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the rally organizers, the Save America rally organizers, and everyone on the extreme right, to tell them that this was not what he had in mind? It was a big mistake. Call it off, call it off, call it off, as Representative Gallagher begged him to do on national television? No. He delighted in it. He reveled in it. He exulted in it. He could not understand why the people around him did not share his delight. And then a long period of silence ensued while the mob beat the daylights out of police officers and invaded this building, as you saw on security footage, and proceeded to hunt down Vice President Mike Pence as a traitor and denounced and cursed Speaker Pelosi, both of whom you heard mob members say they wanted to kill. They were both in real danger. And our government could have been thrown into absolute turmoil without the heroism of our officers and the bravery and courage of a lot of people in this room. Here's what Republican Representative Anthony Gonzalez of Ohio said. He's a former pro football player. We are imploring the president to help, to stand up, to help defend the United States Capitol and the United States Congress, which is under attack. We are begging, essentially, and he was nowhere to be found. Nowhere to be found.
Words.
And as I've emphasized this morning, that dereliction of duty, that desertion of duty was central to his incitement of insurrection and inextricable from it. Inextricable. Bound together. It reveals his state of mind that day, what he was thinking as he provoked the mob to violence and further violence. It shows how he perpetuated his continuing offense on January 6th, his course of conduct charged in the article of impeachment as he further incited the mob during the attack, aiming it at Vice President Mike Pence himself, while failing to quell it in either of his roles as Commander-in-Chief or his real role that day, Inciter-in-Chief. And it powerfully demonstrates that the ex-president knew, of course, that violence was foreseeable, that it was predictable and predicted. That day, since he was not surprised and not horrified, no, he was delighted. And through his acts of omission and commission that day, he abused his office by siding with the insurrectionists at almost every point, rather than with the Congress of the United States, rather than with the Constitution. In just a moment, my colleague, Mr. Cicilline, will address President Trump's conduct, his actions and inactions, his culpable state of mind during the attack, as he will establish yesterday's explosive revelations about House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy's desperate call to Trump and Trump's truly astounding reaction confirm that Trump was doing nothing to help the people in this room or this building. It's now clear beyond doubt that Trump supported the actions of the mob, and so he must be convicted. It's that simple. When he took the stage on January 6th, he knew exactly how combustible the situation was. He knew there were many people in the crowd who were ready to jump into action, to engage in violence at any signal that he needed them to fight like hell to stop the steal. And that's exactly what he told them to do. Then he aimed them straight here, right down Pennsylvania at the Capitol, where he told them that the steal was occurring, that is, the counting of the Electoral College votes. And we all know what happened next. They attacked this building, they disrupted the peaceful transfer of power, they injured and killed people, convinced that they were acting on his instructions and with his approval and protection. And while that happened, he further incited them while failing to defend us. If that's not ground for conviction, if that's not a high crime and misdemeanor against the Republic in the United States of America, then nothing is. President Trump must be convicted for the safety and security of our democracy and our people. Mr. Cicilline.
Well, when you use a lie as foundation, anything you build on it will fall. To say that somebody said something and then to turn and say that's a fact and should be added to the record, that's not how that works. That's not how evidence works.
Senators, as we've demonstrated, there is overwhelming evidence that President Trump incited the violence and knew violence was foreseeable on January 6th. He knew that many in the crowd were posed for violence at his urging. And in fact, many in the sea of thousands in the crowd were wearing body armor and helmets and holding sticks and flagpoles. And then he not only provoked that very same crowd, but aimed them at the Capitol. He literally pointed at this building, at us, during his speech. He pointed to the building where Congress was going to certify the election results and where he knew the vice president himself was presiding over the process. Now, no one is suggesting that President Trump intended every detail of what happened on January 6th. But when he directed the sea of thousands before him, who were reportedly ready to engage in real violence, when he told that crowd to fight like hell, he incited violence targeted at the Capitol, and he most certainly foresaw it. My colleague, Manager Dean, will stand up after me and walk you through the overwhelming evidence that supports those claims. I want to start, though, by talking about what happened after that. There was a lot of discussion yesterday about what the president knew and when he knew it. There are certain things that we do not know about what the president did that day, because the president, that is former President Trump, has remained silent about what he was doing during one of the bloodiest attacks on our Capitol since 1812. Despite a full and fair opportunity to come forward, he's refused to come and tell his story. As Manager Raskin said, we would all do that. In fact, I would insist on it. If I were accused of a grave and serious crime that I was innocent of, I would demand the right to tell my side of the story. President Trump declined. But there are certain facts that are undisputed, that we know to be true despite the president's refusal to testify, which his counsel either ignored entirely or didn't and couldn't dispute. Before I go to those facts, let me quickly just touch on a few things. First, President Trump and his counsel have resorted to arguments that the evidence presented was somehow manufactured or hidden from them. And I want to be very clear about this because this is important. In terms of the timing of when they received materials here, defense counsel had access to all materials when they were entitled to have them under Senate Resolution 47. And they cannot and have not alleged otherwise. As to their desperate claim that evidence was somehow manufactured, they have not alleged that one tweet from their client was actually inaccurate, nor can they. We got these tweets, which are, of course, statements from the former president, from a public archive, and they are all correct. You also know the president's claims about evidence being manipulated also are untrue because they didn't even object to the introduction of the evidence when they had the opportunity to do so. So I hope we can now set those issues aside and turn to the facts of this case and really set the record straight about the undisputed facts in this case, about what the president knew that day and when he knew it. And at the outset, let me say this. As you may recall, in direct response to a question yesterday, President Trump's counsel stated, and I quote, "At no point was the president informed the vice president was in any danger," end quote.
These people are going to get slain by the defense.
Clearly, that is simply not true. As you can see here, from just after 12 p.m. to just before 2 p.m., President Trump delivered his statements at the rally, which incited an initial wave of riot protesters coming down to the Capitol. And his speech was still ongoing, and you saw the evidence of people broadcasting that on their phones. He finished his speech at about 1:11 p.m., at which point a much larger wave surged toward us here at the Capitol, ripping down scaffolding and triggering calls for law enforcement assistance. 30 minutes later, at 1:49 p.m., as the violence intensified, President Trump tweeted a video of his remarks at the rally with the caption, quote, "Our country has had enough. We will not take it anymore, and that's what this is all about," end quote. During the half hour following that tweet, the situation here drastically deteriorated. Insurrectionists breached the Capitol barriers, then its steps, then the complex itself. By 2:12, the insurrectionist mob had overwhelmed the police and started their violent attack on the Capitol. And as you all know, this attack occurred and played out on live television. Every major network was showing it. We've shown you during the course of this trial, side by side, exactly what the president would have seen on TV or his Twitter account. We've also shown you that he would have seen around 2:12 p.m. images of Vice President Pence being rushed off the Senate floor. Now, I won't replay all of that for you, but for timing purposes, here's the footage reacting to Vice President Pence leaving the floor.
No audio. They just cut out. It looks like they and sometimes the Senate
like they just ushered Mike Pence out really quickly.
Yes, they did. That's exactly what just happened there. They ushered Mike Pence out. They moved him fast. I saw the motions too.
Defense counsel seems to suggest that somehow the president of the United States was not aware of this. That the president had no idea that his his vice president had been evacuated from the Senate floor for his safety because violent rioters had broken into the Capitol, with thousands more coming, and with the Capitol Police completely overwhelmed. This was on live television. So defense counsel is suggesting that the President of the United States knew less about this than the American people. This is just not possible. That the Secret Service failed to mention that his vice president was being rushed from the Senate for his own protection. That nobody in the White House thought to alert him. That none of our law enforcement agencies raised a concern to the commander-in-chief that the vice president was being evacuated from the Senate floor as a violent mob assaulted the Capitol. That simply cannot be. And with each passing minute on the timeline of events on January 6th, it grows more and more inconceivable. Let's continue forward in time. Between 2:12 to 2:24, the Senate recessed. Speaker Nancy Pelosi was ushered off the floor. The Capitol Police announced a breach and a lockdown, and the insurrectionist mob began chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." And it was unfolding on live TV in front of the entire world. So again, let me ask you, does it strike you as credible that nobody, not a single person, informed the president that his vice president had been evacuated? Or that the president didn't glance at the television or his Twitter account and learn about the events that were happening? Remember, this was the day of the Electoral College. Remember his obsession with stopping the certification. It's just not credible that the president at no point knew his vice president was in this building and was in real danger. Senators, I submit to you these facts. This timeline is undisputed. At 2:24 p.m., after rioters breached the barriers, after calls for assistance, after rioters stormed the building, after Vice President Pence was rushed from the Senate floor, and just before Vice President Pence was further evacuated for his safety, President Trump decided to attack his own vice president on Twitter. The undisputed facts confirm that not only must President Trump have been aware of the vice president's danger, but he still sent out a tweet attacking him, further inciting the very mob that was in just a few feet of him inside of this very building. The vice president was there with his family. He was in danger for his life. They were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," and had erected a noose outside. And as we've shown, the mob responded to President Trump's attack instantly. The tweet was read aloud on a bullhorn, if you remember that video. Insurrectionists began chanting again about Mike Pence. And in those critical moments, we see President Trump engaging in a dereliction of his duty by further inciting the mob in real time to target the vice president with knowledge that the insurrection was ongoing. And that's, of course, included in the conduct charged in this article of impeachment. The former president's counsel's suggestion otherwise is completely wrong. His further incitement is impeachable conduct that continued during the course of this assault itself, and it's part of the constitutional crime and was entirely and completely a part of his indefensible failure to protect the Congress. Now, there's been some confusion as to the phone call I referenced with Senator Lee. So I want to be clear about certain facts that are not in dispute. First, Senator Lee has confirmed that the call occurred at 2:26 p.m., so I've added that to the timeline above. Remember, by this phone call, the vice president has just been evacuated on live television for his own safety. And Donald Trump had, after that, tweeted an attack on him, which the insurgents read on a bullhorn. And a few minutes after Donald Trump's tweet, he didn't reach out to check on the vice president's safety. He called a senator to ask about delaying the certification. The call was interrupted. Senator Tuberville has since explained, and I quote, "I looked at the phone and it said the White House on it. I said, hello. The president said a few words. I said, Mr. President, they're taking the vice president out and they want me to get off the phone, and I've got to go, end quote. That was his second evacuation that day. A minute later, live feeds documented the insurgents chanting, "Mike Pence is a traitor." At this point, even if somehow he'd missed it earlier, it's inconceivable that the former president, was unaware that the vice president was in danger. And what does the president do after hearing that? Does he rush to secure the Capitol? Does he do anything to quell the mob? Does he call his vice president to check on his safety? We all know the answer to those questions too. There can be no dispute. He took none of those steps, not a single one. Even after learning that senators were being evacuated and that Vice President Pence had also been evacuated, he did nothing to help the vice president. And here's some more evidence that we've since learned. At some point over the following 30 minutes, President Trump spoke to Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. And as Representative Jamie Herrera Butler has revealed, evidence that now has been stipulated as part of the evidentiary record. In that conversation, Kevin McCarthy is pleading with the former president to do something. He first tries to assign the blame to another group, and Leader McCarthy says, "No, these are your supporters, Mr. President." And what does the president say in response? Not, "Send people right away. I didn't realize you were in danger." He says, "Well, Kevin," and I quote, "Well, Kevin, I guess these people are more upset about the election than you are," end quote. I guess these people are more upset about the election than you are. The president, just as he conveyed in that tweet at 6:01, was essentially saying, "You got what you deserve." Let me say that again. Not only was the president fully aware of the vice president's situation and the situation that we were all in when he was asked for help, when he was asked to defend the Capitol less than 30 minutes after inciting this violence against his own vice president, President Trump refused that request for assistance. And he told us why. His singular focus, stopping the certification of the election of his opponent. He incited the violence to stop the certification. He attacked the vice president and further incited the insurrection to pressure the vice president to stop the certification. He called Senator Tuberville to stop the certification, and he refused to send help to Congress. And this Congress and the vice president of the United States were in mortal danger because he wanted to stop the certification. And he did these things, attacking the vice president, calling Senator Tuberville, refusing Representative McCarthy's request, with full knowledge of the violent attack that was underway at that point. He chose retaining his own power over the safety of Americans. I can't imagine more damning evidence of his state of mind. The call ended with a screaming match interrupted by violent rioters breaking through the windows of Representative McCarthy's office. Senators, the president knew this was happening. He didn't do anything to help his vice president or any of you or any of the brave officers and other employees serving the American people that day. His sole focus was stealing the election for himself. And he apparently has still not thought of anyone else. According to more new facts revealed last night, the vice president's team does not agree with the president's counsel or the president's counsel's assessment either. The report, and I quote, says, Pence's team does not agree with the Trump lawyer's assessment that Trump was concerned about Pence's safety. Trump didn't call him that day or for 5 days after that. No one else on Trump's team called as Pence was evacuated to one room in another with screaming mob nearby.
Objection, this is not in evidence. If you wanted a stipulation for this,
The counsel will sit down.
Senators, Remember, everyone.
Chair has no way of knowing what material is evidence or not. The counsel for the president will have a chance to speak. And the chair will consider the issue.
How many times will this information have to be proven that it's inaccurate?
They could have killed us all. Our staff, the officers protecting all of us, everyone. And President Trump not only incited it, but continued inciting it as it occurred with attacks on his vice president, and then willfully refused to defend us, furthering his provocation and incitement by the mob, siding with the mob, siding with the violent insurrectionists, criminals who killed and injured police officers sworn to protect us because they were, quote, more upset about the election than Leader McCarthy. Those facts are undisputed. President Trump has not offered any evidence or any argument to disprove them. His lawyers almost entirely ignored these facts in their short presentation. We have only his counsel's false claim yesterday that, quote, at no point was the president informed that the vice president was in any danger, end quote. A claim that is refuted not just by common sense, but by the timeline you have seen and also the vice president's legal team. So there can be no doubt that at the moment we most needed a president to preserve, protect, and defend us, President Trump instead willfully betrayed us. He violated his oath. He left all of us and officers like Eugene Goodman to our own devices against an attack he had incited and he alone could stop. That is why he must be convicted. And I'd like to conclude by making one final point that follows directly from what I just discussed. Our case and the article of impeachment before you absolutely includes President Trump's dereliction of duty on January 6th. His failure as inciter-in-chief to immediately quell or call off the mob, his failure as commander-in-chief to immediately do everything in his power to secure the Capitol, that is a further basis on which to convict, and there can be no doubt of that. The ongoing constitutional misconduct is like any continuing offense, and the proof of that is overwhelming. Most directly, his dereliction of duty offers conclusive, irrefutable evidence that he acted willfully as we charge. He wasn't furious or sad or shocked like virtually everyone else in America. He was reported by those around him as delighted. Rather than rush to our aid or demand his mob retreat, he watched the attack on TV and praised the mob to Leader McCarthy as more loyal to him, more upset about the election, and that was all that mattered. His reaction is also further evidence of his intent. He acted exactly the way a person would act if they had indeed incited the mob to violence to stop the steal. Moreover, as I've shown, President Trump's dereliction and desertion of duty includes his decision to further incite the mob, even as he failed to protect us. While the mob hunted Vice President Pence in these very halls, he attacked Vice President Pence. While he tried to stop the steal, he spread the big lie. We all saw how his mob responded in real time. This further incitement was part of his dereliction of duty, was also part of his course of conduct, encouraging and provoking the mob to violence. President Trump's dereliction of duty also highlights how foreseeable the attack was to him.
I thought he was concluding.
At 6 p.m. he said, and I quote, "These are the things and events that happen when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away from great patriots who have been badly and unfairly treated for so long." This tweet continued his endorsement of the attack, his failure to condemn it, his desertion of duty. But it also reveals his view that this was, of course, what would happen when Congress refused his demand to reject the election that he continued to tell his supporters was stolen and he had actually won in a landslide. Again, he wasn't surprised. He saw this as a predictable result of his repeated demands that his followers stop the steal by any means possible. This was all connected. His dereliction of duty, his desertion of duty was part and parcel of the crime charged in the impeachment. And it's certainly a basis on which to vote for conviction. If you believe that he willfully refused to defend us and the law enforcement officers fighting to save us, and that he was delighted by the attack, and that he saw it as a natural result of his call to stop the steal, and that he continued to incite and target violence as the attack unfolded, we respectfully submit you must vote to convict and disqualify so that the events of January 6th can never happen again in this country.
Not only has that information been disputed, but it's been proven inaccurate. They just keep saying it's undisputed as if that matters.
Order. Mr. President, moments ago, House Manager Cicilline reported again.
The Senator will withhold. I'm advised by the parliamentarian that debate is not in order.
Oh, the defense can't talk. Okay.
That debate is not in order because this is not debate. He said something that's not true.
An absence of quorum has been suggested.
There's clearly a quorum, sir.
And the clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
Wow.
Consent to suspend the quorum call.
Is there objection? Their objection is heard.
Mr. Barrasso.
So everything they've been saying has already been proven inaccurate, like I've said a couple times now. They're clinging so hard to what was one statement, but now it's two statements that were said on CNN last night. Conveniently, 5 or 6 weeks after the event happened on the 6th, now these statements are coming out by people who were apparently being interviewed on CNN, and now this is newly submitted factual evidence, and they're just clinging on to it, and they're using these statements as a foundation to stack their lies on, as if those lies haven't already been proven inaccurate and doctored and manipulated. It's gonna fall. That's what happens. Use false information as your foundation. Your castle will fall. Anything you build on it will fall. I can't wait to see these people get slain. So stupid. It is so stupid. And they're so proud of themselves. Their body language, the way they smirk and smile and use hand gestures. They're so proud of themselves. Stupid. It's so stupid. And I like how he said that the insurrectionists entered the Capitol and the president turned his back on Americans. Well, I thought you were saying that Americans had entered the Capitol. So was it Americans attacking Americans? As far as I know, it was only 8 people that were completely afraid for their lives. I don't know. And it seems suspicious to me. If somebody entered a building just randomly, why would you be afraid for your life? Were you doing something wrong? Are you guilty? It seems strange to me. Well, just had to ban a crackhead. Nothing he said came through because his comments were flagged, but I don't know. I think he's pro-Antifa. He's mad that his buddies are crying children in the streets. That's all right. Yeah, I see a lot of you saying similar things to what I'm thinking. This stuff is going to be proven false and inaccurate again. That may not change the result. These people are just doing and saying whatever they want. Well, let's get some shout outs in. Thank you so much, JJ Money, Callie, Leonardo, Cami, Lisa, Jennifer, and Josh for your donations and all your support. I really appreciate you. And thank you so much, Victor, for joining the membership program, and welcome to the family. You're officially a hooligan. And thank you so much, David, for joining the membership program, and welcome to the family. You're officially a hooligan. Well, I really want to hear the defense go in and just start slaying these people. Metaphorically, I'm not inciting an insurrection or anything like that. I'm not inciting an erection. But I'd really like to hear some facts. Top all that crying that just happened. Regardless of how this goes, I think it's always good to hear the facts. I wish they would show the face of the other side whenever that happens, though. I think if those people would have came back from recess and would have, well, they call that video propaganda footage. It's propaganda footage. I mean, you got all of our faces up there showing exactly what we were saying days before. That's just propaganda footage. Just ignore that. I'd really like to see their faces. If they would have been in there, maybe they would realize how stupid they look. They look stupid as hell. They must be saving the toaster for last. I think that's the secret weapon. Mo, why are you saying I was late today? I have not been late today. We've been covering this the whole time it's been on. Actually, we sat here for almost a whole hour chit-chatting, just hanging out before they called a 45-minute recess. Hopefully they don't do that again. Have us just sitting here waiting on them. They got some nerve saying that crap they were saying a little bit ago. Oh, man, if they were talking about me, I'd be here at 7 a.m. What are you talking about? You'll never come back on time. Go for a 15-minute recess and show up 30 minutes late. Talk about how you be here at 7 a.m. You ain't never on time. Old rat skin. You need to fix your hair, buddy. I think it's all that lying. All that lying just blew out the top of his hairline there. It's all messed up. I don't know. Just needs to shave it down. It's getting wiry. Looking rough. Real rough. I can't wait to hear what they have to say when they come back. They're like, sorry, defense, you can't speak. Don't point out the facts. Don't point out the facts. It's not what we do here. You're messing up the show. You wait till a commercial break. Wait till we're at recess to start talking about the facts. Stupid. Some pretty aggressive finger pointing going on. I don't know. I can't wait to hear the attorney from Philadelphia. He means business when he speaks. Something else I noticed is Raskin be like touching his nose, like hardcore, like, and I don't mean like in a be scared of COVID kind of way. I mean like snot on your hands and then touch the podium, and then 6 other people are going to show up and touch the podium too. What's the point of being mandated to wear masks on federal property if you guys are just wiping your boogers all over the podium? I don't understand that. I'd be mad too. If I was the defense, I'd be mad too. Every time you got to go up there, you got to just sanitize the whole podium because it's like a 6-year-old's been up there just wiping their nose all over it like it's an iPad. Just rough. These people are rough. My goodness. I've been wanting to say that for like 3 days. I just keep forgetting. Man, he touched his face like 6 times the last time he was up there. Just rough. That guy's got to be in rough shape. Just imagine what he looks like in person. Scruffy and disgruntled. Hair's all wiry. Spots all glowing. 4 fingers up his nose. Lying. Smelling like alcohol and drug abuse. Amongst other things. Rough. He lives up to his name. Lives right up to his name. Makes you want to watch like Secret of Nim or something. It's just a rat politician. It's just rough. It's just rough. It's rough stuff. I wonder if they're going to laugh at the defense again. Oh, here's the mics.
Madam, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President,
The senator from Utah.
I withdraw my appeal.
The appeal withdrawn. The chair would advise everybody. The evidentiary record is closed. S-Res 47 described the scope of those things not admitted into evidence as those referenced in trial. New evidence is not permitted in closing argument. References to such new evidence will be stricken.
I mean, that wasn't factual evidence anyways, but good.
The House managers have the floor if they wish to resume. House managers.
Mr. President,
House manager.
esteemed senators, good afternoon. We are grateful for your kind attention this week as we engaged in a process formulated and put to paper by the founders in my home city of Philadelphia, which is getting its fair share of attention this week, in 1787, 234 years ago. My colleague, Mr. Cicilline, addressed the importance of the President's dereliction of duty. I will focus on 3 specific aspects of this case, which the defense have raised questions about. First, the defense suggests that this was just one speech, and one speech cannot incite insurrection. And the defense suggested, because the attack was pre-planned by some insurrectionists, Donald Trump is somehow not culpable. Both of these things are plainly not true, nor are they what we allege. So let's be clear. We are not suggesting that Donald Trump's January 6th speech by itself incited the attack. We have shown that his course of conduct leading up to and including that speech incited the attack. The defense is correct that the insurrection was pre-planned. That supports our point. We argued, and the evidence overwhelmingly confirms, that Donald Trump's conduct over many months incited his supporters to believe, one, his big lie, that the only way he could lose was if the election was rigged. Two, that to ensure the election would not be stolen, to prevent the fraud, they had to stop the steal. And three, they had to fight to stop the steal or they would not have a country anymore. This conduct
Isn't that all the same thing?
culminated in Donald Trump sending a save the date on December the 19th, 18 days before the attack, telling his base exactly when, where, and who to fight. And while he was doing this, he spent $50 million from his legal defense fund to simultaneously broadcast his message to stop the steal over all major networks. Donald Trump invited them, he incited them, then he directed them. Here are a few clips that will help bring that story to light.
Can you give a direct answer? You will accept the election?
I have to see. Look, I have to see. No, I'm not going to just say yes. And this election will be the most rigged election in history. This is going to be the greatest election disaster in history. And the only way they can take this election away from us is if this is a rigged election. We're going to win this election. That's right. It's a rigged election. It's the only way we're going to lose.
Do you commit to making sure that there's a peaceful transfer of power?
We want to get rid of the ballots.
You see, she almost started crying too soon. She's gonna be crying. You could tell. That's what they sent her up there for.
The only way we're going to lose is if there's...
They can't have the toaster crying because we're all gonna figure out it's a man.
So be careful.
But this will be one of the greatest most fraudulent elections ever.
We're not going to let this election be taken away from us. That's the only way they're going to win it. This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. We were winning in all the key locations by a lot, actually. And then our numbers started miraculously getting whittled away in secret. And this is a case where they're trying to steal an election. They're trying to rig an election. And we can't let that happen. You can't let another person steal that election from you. All over the country, people are together in holding up signs, stop the steal. If we don't root out the fraud, the tremendous and horrible fraud that's taken place in our 2020 election, we don't have a country anymore. We cannot allow a completely fraudulent election to stand. We're going to fight like hell, I'll tell you right now. If you don't fight to save your country with everything you have, you're not going to have a country left. We will not bend, we will not break, we will not yield. We will never give in, we will never give up, we will never back down, we will never, ever surrender. All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen. We will never give up, we will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved. And to use a favorite term that all of you people really came up with, we will stop the steal. Because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong. Make no mistake, this election was stolen from you, from me, and from the country, and we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Our point is this was not one speech. This was a deliberate, purposeful effort by Donald Trump over many months that resulted in the well-organized mob's attack on January the 6th. That brings me to my second point, the violence. Defense counsel argues that there is no way that Donald Trump could have known what would happen. Yet, we are not suggesting, nor is it necessary for us to prove, that Donald Trump knew every detail of what would unfold on January the 6th, or even how horrible and deadly the attack would become. But he did know. As he looked out on that sea of thousands in front of him, some wearing body armor and helmets, others carrying weapons, that the result would be violence. The evidence is overwhelming. The evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates this. A few points on this. Donald Trump knew the people he was inciting leading up to January the 6th. He saw the violence they were capable of. He had a pattern and practice of praising and encouraging supporters of violence, never condemning it. It is not a coincidence that those same people, the Proud Boys, the organizer of the Trump Caravan, the supporters and speakers at the 2nd Million MAGA March, all showed up on January the 6th. And Donald Trump's behavior was different. This was not just a comment by an official or a politician fighting for a cause. This was months of cultivating a base of people who were violent, praising that violence, and then leading that violence, that rage, straight to a joint session of Congress where he knew his vice president was presiding. And Donald Trump had warnings about the crowd in front of him on January 6th. There were detailed posts online of attack plans. Law enforcement warned that these posts were real threats and even made arrests in the days leading up to the attack. There were credible reports that many would be armed and ready to attack the Capitol. Despite these credible warnings of serious, dangerous threats to our Capitol, when the crowd was standing in front of the president, ready to take orders and attack, he said, "We're going to the Capitol, and we fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore." Here's a short clip.
She means edited.
What do you want to call them? Give me a name. Give me a
White
name.
supremacists and
white like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
Welcome to the...
I can't have them flagging me for fight music. I'm like, Tech 9 is hit you for copyrights.
Because they're nice. So it's bus. They had hundreds of cars. Trump, and the American flag. That's it. You see Trump and American flag.
In the first Million MAGA March, we promised that if the GOP would not do everything in their power to keep Trump in office, then we would destroy the GOP. And as we gather here in Washington, D.C. for a 2nd Million MAGA March, we're done making promises. It has to happen now. We are going to destroy the GOP. Let's go! Destroy the GOP! Destroy the GOP! Destroy the GOP!
Because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
Senators, the violence on January the 6th was demonstrably foreseeable. Trump even said so himself at 6:01 p.m. the day of the attack. The last thing he said before he went to sleep, quote, "These are the things that happened, end quote. He foresaw this, and he admitted as much. That brings me to my final point, the insurrectionists. Defense counsel has suggested these people came here on their own. The defense brief states that the insurrectionists, quote, did so for their own accord and for their own reasons, and are being criminally prosecuted. It is true that some insurrectionists are being prosecuted, but it is not true that they did so of their own accord and for their own reasons. The evidence makes clear the exact opposite, that they did this for Donald Trump, at his invitation, at his direction, at his command. They said this before the attack, during the attack. They said it after the attack. Leading up to January the 6th, in post after post, the president's supporters confirmed This was for Donald Trump. It was at his direction. One supporter wrote, and I quote, "If Congress illegally certifies Biden, Trump would have absolutely no choice but to demand us to storm the Capitol and kill/beat them up for it." They even say publicly, openly, and proudly that President Trump would help them commandeer the National Guard. So all they have to do is overwhelm 2,000 Capitol Police officers. During his speech on January the 6th, Trump supporters chanted his words back to him. They even live tweeted his commands, as Ms. Neguse showed you. During the attack, the insurrectionists at the Capitol chanted Donald Trump's words from his tweets, rallies, and from the speech of the 6th. They held signs that said and chanted, "Fight for Trump, stop the steal." They read his tweets over bullhorns, amplifying his demands. Another rioter, while live streaming the insurrection from the Capitol, said, quote, "He'll be happy, we're fighting for Trump." What's more, the insurrectionists were not hiding. They believed they were following the orders from our commander-in-chief. They felt secure enough in the legitimacy of their actions to take selfies, to post photos and videos on social media. After the attack, rioter after rioter confirmed this too. Jenna Ryan, who was later accused for her role in the insurrection, said, quote, "I thought I was following my president. I thought we were following what we were called to do." And President Trump requested that we be in D.C. on the 6th. When it became clear that Donald Trump would not protect them, some of his supporters said they felt duped. They felt tricked. Listen to some of this evidence.
And even if they think for a second that they're going to get away with it today, they got another thing coming. Because today is just a day. And today is just the beginning. They haven't seen a resistance until they have seen a patriot fight for their country.
If you died today.
Parties will withhold.
This is crooked.
The parties will withhold.
It is in the record.
The evidentiary record is closed. S. 47 described the scope of those things admitted into evidence as those referenced in trial. New evidence is not permitted in closing argument. References to such new evidence will be stricken. Who yields time?
Mr. President, the statement was in evidence, the slide was not, so we will withdraw the slide. But the statement was in evidence.
And doesn't prove incitement or anything like that.
They were following the president's orders. And you'll see something clearly. Donald Trump knew who these people were. As the slide shows, the people he cultivated, whose violence he praised, were all there on January the 6th. The Proud Boys who Donald Trump told to stand back and stand by in September of 2020. Keith Lee, organizer of the Trump caravan that tried to drive the Biden campaign bus off the road. Katrina Pearson, the speaker at the 2nd Million MAGA March. They were all there.
How come they don't mention the Proud Boys were arrested when they entered D.C.? Or that Trump didn't tell them to show up armed or in gear? And he never explicitly told them to do anything other than to let their voices be heard. Every time he spoke or tweeted, it always ended with be peacefully or patriotically or both.
What you're about to see is in the record. Oh, correction. The record did include appropriately the last video. So we will keep that in the record, and I will keep it in my closing remarks.
I think she's trying to figure out her cue to cry. These people are well organized. I hope the defense plays their video because their video is awesome. Yeah, I appreciate you, Big Red. Thank you guys for being here. Well, while we got a second, why don't you hit that like button? The more likes that we get in a short period of time, the more people the algorithm will bring into the chat to hang out with us and see this circus show. I think as many people as possible should see these liars and criers right before they get slammed by the defense. And then to see the results of what happened after these liars are proven to be liars. See the results. All right, let's get some shout outs in. Thank you so much, William, Salty Nicholas, Ed, Anthony, and Holly for joining the membership program, and welcome to the family. You're officially hooligans. And thank you so much, Anthony, Jen, and Mr. Tix for your donations and all your support. I really appreciate all of you being here. If you're new here, please subscribe, make sure you hit the bell icon, and join the Discord. The Discord is a free app that you download on your phone. Come to any of my live videos, even if they're not live anymore. In the description, if you're on a phone, you'll have to exit out of the live chat. But in the drop down in the description, there's a link to the Discord server. You follow the steps, and then you'll be greeted with an automated message letting you know that you've done all you need to do in order to receive notifications when and where I go live. It is the most reliable source of live notifications. YouTube does not like to tell my viewers when I go live because that's how they learn the truth. So make sure you're a part of the Discord. It's sad. We've seen these liars say the same stuff over and over again for 5 days now. The defense barely even gets to speak. Well, they really don't need to speak because I think it only took them 3 hours to just totally burn down any kind of wall of lies that they tried to put up. And now they're trying to latch onto these CNN statements that were just struck from the record because it's too late to provide new evidence. Stupid people. So stupid. Oh, I can't wait to hear the defense. I want something good. And if they ain't got nothing good, at least play the video again because the video is awesome.
Senators will take their seats. The Senate will be in order. Representative may continue.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have to say that of all the trials I have ever been a part of, this is certainly one of them. As the slides show, the people he called
Was that even funny?
praised were all there on January the 6th. The Proud Boys who Donald Trump told to stand back and stand by in September of 2020, Keith Lee, the organizer of the Trump caravan that tried to drive the Biden campaign bus off the road, Katrina Pearson, the speaker at the second Million MAGA March, they were all there. Here is one final clip, also submitted in the record.
That's what we fucking need, to have 30,000 guns up there. That's what we need.
Well, there went my advertisement on this video. Good, drop the F word right at the end.
Insurrectionists are facing criminal charges. Donald Trump was acting as our commander-in-chief. He was our president. He used his office and the authority it commands to incite an attack. And when Congress and the Constitution were under attack, he abandoned his duties, violated his oath, failing to preserve, protect, and defend. That is why we are here, because the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, incited and directed thousands of people to attack the legislative branch. He knew what his supporters were capable of. He inflamed them, sent them down Pennsylvania Avenue, not on any old day, but on the day we were certifying the election results. As they were banging on our doors, he failed to defend us, because this is what he wanted. He wanted to remain in power. For that crime against the Republic, he must be held accountable. Senators, the insurrectionists are still listening. Before I end, I must admit, until we were preparing for this trial, I didn't know the extent of many of these facts. I witnessed the horror, but I didn't know. I didn't know how deliberate the president's planning was, how he had invested in it, how many times he incited his supporters with these lies, how carefully and consistently he incited them to violence on January the 6th. While many of us may have tuned out his rallies, I also did not know the extent that his followers were listening, were hanging on his every word. And honestly, I did not know how close the mob actually came to their violent ends, that they were just steps away from all of us, that the death toll could have been much higher, but for the bravery of men and women who protected us. But now we know. We know the bravery of people like Officer Goodman and all the men and women of the Capitol Police, of the custodians who, with pride and a sense of duty in their work, cleaned up shattered glass, splintered wood, and blood-stained floors. We know the sacrifice of life and limb. We know what Donald Trump did. We know what he failed to do. Though it is difficult to bear witness and face the reality of what happened in these halls, what happens if we don't confront these facts? What happens if there is no accountability? For those who say we need to get past this, we need to come together, we need to unify. If we don't set this right and call it what it was, the highest of constitutional crimes by the President of the United States, the past will not be past. The past will become our future for my grandchildren and for their children. Senators, we are in a dialogue with history, a conversation with our past, with a hope for our future. 234 years from now, it may be that no one person here among us is remembered. And yet, what we do here, what is being asked of each of us here in this moment, will be remembered. History has found us.
Why in 234 years? Is something promised then? Sit down, psychopath. You forgot to cry.
I'd now like to bring up Mr. Neguse.
Oh yes, call up this guy. He always does lots of hand movements and head nods and stuff. This should be good. I'm going to grab another monster. Just one moment.
Mr. President, distinguished senators, there's an old quote from Henry Clay, son of Kentucky, that courtesies of a small and trivial character are the ones that strike deepest in the grateful and appreciating heart. I want to say on behalf of all the House managers, we are very grateful for the courtesies. that you've extended to us and to President's counsel during the course of this trial. You've heard my colleague, Manager Dean, go through the overwhelming evidence that makes clear that President Trump must be convicted and disqualified for his high crime. I'm not going to repeat that evidence. It speaks for itself. Earlier in this trial, you might recall a few days ago that I mentioned my expectation that President Trump's lawyers might do everything they could to avoid discussing the facts of this case. And I can understand why. I mean, the evidence that all of us presented, that Manager Dean just summarized, is pretty devastating. And so rather than address it, the President has offered up distractions, excuses, anything but actually trying to defend against the facts. They said things like, President Trump is now a private citizen, so the criminal justice system can deal with him. Or that we haven't set a clear standard for incitement. They talked a lot about due process, and that all politicians say words like fight. I'd like to take a minute to explain why each of those distractions are precisely that, distractions, and why they do not prevent in any way the Senate from convicting President Trump. Number one, every president is one day a private citizen again. So, the argument that because President Trump has left office, he shouldn't be impeached for conduct committed while he was in office doesn't make sense. Why would the Constitution include the impeachment power at all if the criminal justice system serves as a suitable alternative once a president leaves office? It wouldn't. Impeachment is a remedy separate and apart from the criminal justice system, and for good reason. The presidency, it comes with special powers, extraordinary powers, not bestowed on ordinary citizens. And if those powers are abused, they can cause great damage to our country, and they have to be dealt with in a separate forum. This forum. And it would be unwise to suggest that going forward, the only appropriate response to constitutional offenses committed by a president are criminal charges when the president returns to private life. That's not the kind of political system any of us want. And it's not the kind of constitutional system the framers intended.
Oh, good. I didn't miss all the hand gestures and head nods.
It is true. We haven't cited criminal statutes establishing elements of incitement because, again, this isn't a criminal trial. It's not a criminal case. President Trump is charged with a constitutional offense, and you are tasked with determining whether or not he committed that high crime as understood by our framers. So the relevant question, which President Trump's lawyers would have you ignore, is would our framers have considered a president inciting a violent mob to attack our government while seeking to stop the certification of our elections? Would they have considered that an impeachable offense? Who among us really thinks the answer to that question is no? Third, due process. So, just to be absolutely clear, the House, with the sole power of impeachment, determines what the process looks like in the House, and the Senate does the same for the trial. During this trial, the president has counsel. They've argued very vigorously on his behalf. We had a full presentation of evidence, adversarial presentations, motions. The president was invited to testify. He declined. The president was invited to provide exculpatory evidence. He declined. You can't claim there's no due process when you won't participate in the process. And we know this case isn't one that requires a complicated legal analysis. You lived it. The managers and I, we lived it. Our country lived it. The president, in public view, right out in the open, incited a violent mob. A mob that temporarily, at least, stopped us from certifying an election. If there were ever an exigent circumstance, this is it. Number 4, we all know that President Trump's defense, as we predicted, spent a lot of time, a whole lot of time, comparing his conduct to other politicians, using words like fight. And of course, you saw the hours of video. As I said on Thursday, we trust you to know the difference. Because what you will not find in those video montages that they showed you is any of those speeches, those remarks, culminating in a violent insurrection on our nation's capital. That's the difference. The president spent months inflaming his supporters to believe that the election had been stolen from him, from them, which was not true. He summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and when the violence erupted, he did nothing to stop it, instead inciting it further. Senators, all of these arguments offered by the president have one fundamental thing in common. One. They have nothing to do with whether or not, factually, whether or not the president incited this attack. They've given you a lot of distractions so they don't have to defend what happened here on that terrible day. And they do that because they believe those distractions are going to work. That you'll ignore the president's conduct instead of confronting it. I think they're wrong. Some of you know this already. I'm the youngest member of our manager team by quite a few years. So perhaps I'm a bit naive, but I just don't believe that. I really don't. I don't believe their effort is going to work. And here is why. Because I know what this body is capable of. I may not have witnessed it, but I've read about it in the history books. I've seen the C-SPAN footage, archives, sometimes watched them for hours. And yes, I've actually done that. And the history of our country in those books and in those tapes, the history of this country has been defined right here on this floor. The 13th Amendment, the amendment abolishing slavery, was passed in this very room. In this room, not figuratively, literally, where you all sit and where I stand. In 1964, this body, with the help of senators like John Sherman Cooper and so many others, this body secured passage of the Civil Rights Act. We made the decision to enter World War II from this chamber. We've certainly had our struggles, but we've always risen to the occasion when it mattered the most. Not by ignoring injustice or cowering to bullies and threats, but by doing the right thing, by trying to do the right thing. And that's why so many nations around the world aspire to be like America. They stand up to dictators and autocrats and tyrants because America is a guiding light for them, a North Star. They do so, they look to us because we have been a guiding light, a North Star in these moments. Because the people who sat in your chairs, when confronted with choices that define us, rose to the occasion. I want to offer one more example of a decision made in this room by this body that resonated with me. The first day I stood up in this trial, I mentioned that I was the son of immigrants, like many of you, and many senators graciously approached me after my presentation and asked me where my parents were from. And I told those who asked that my folks were from East Africa. In 1986, this body considered a bill to override President Reagan's veto of legislation imposing sanctions on South Africa during apartheid. 2 senators who sit in this room, one Democrat and one Republican, voted to override that veto. That vote was not about gaining political favor. And in fact, it was made despite potentially losing political favor. And I have to imagine that that vote was cast, like the decisions before it, because there are moments that transcend party politics and that require us to put country above our party because the consequences of not doing so are just too great. Senators, this is one of those moments. Many folks who are watching today's proceedings may not know this, but House members like me and Lead Manager Raskin, our fellow managers, we're not allowed on the Senate floor without express permission. No one is. Certainly the senators are aware of that.
So what?
Is sacred. It's one of the reasons why I, like so many of you, was so offended to see it desecrated by that mob. To see those insurrectionists diminishing and devaluing and disrespecting these hallowed halls that my whole life I have held in such awe. Because of those rules that I just mentioned,
oh, he's gonna cry.
This will be the only time I have the privilege to stand before you like this. When the trial's over, I'll go back to being not an impeachment manager, but back to being just a House member. The trial will end, and we'll resume our lives and our work. But for some, there will be no end to the pain of what happened on January 6th. The officers who struggled to recover from the injuries they sustained to protect us, they struggle to recover today. The families who continue to mourn those who they lost on that terrible, tragic day. I was struck yesterday by defense counsel.
Well, not a bus, I guess.
References to hate. One of my favorite quotes of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., it's one that has sustained me during times of adversity, I suspect it sustained some of you, is that I've decided to stick with love. That hate is too great a burden to bear.
So what?
This trial is not born from hatred. Far from it. It's born from love of country, our country. Our desire to maintain it. Our desire to see America at its best. And in those moments that I spoke of, Civil Rights Act, so much more, we remember those moments because they helped define and enshrine America at its best.
Does this have to do with the impeachment still, or are we talking about something else now?
I firmly believe that our certification of the Electoral College votes in the early hours of January 7th, our refusal to let our republic be threatened and taken down by a violent mob, will go down in history as one of those moments too. And I believe that this body can rise to the occasion once again today by convicting President Trump, defending our republic. And the stakes could not be higher. Because the cold, hard truth is that what happened on January 6th can happen again. I fear, like many of you do, that the violence we saw on that terrible day may be just the beginning. We've shown you the ongoing risks, the extremist groups who grow more emboldened every day. Senators, this cannot be the beginning. It can't be the new normal. It has to be the end. And that decision is in your hands.
Just go sit down. Go sit down. We had enough of you, buddy. How come when the defense plays videos, it's a montage, and when the liars play video footage, that's evidence? That don't make no sense.
My daughter Hannah said something to me last night that stopped me cold and brought me up short.
It must be facts. It must be some evidence.
Very moved by all the victims of the violence, the officers and their families. But Hannah told me last night she felt really sorry for the kid of a man who said goodbye to his children before he left home to come and join Trump's actions. Their father had told them that their dad might not be coming home again and they might never see him again. In other words, he was expecting violence. He might die, as insurrectionists did. And that shook me. Hannah said, how can the president put children and people's families in that situation and then just run away from the whole thing? That shook me. And I was filled with self-reproach because when I first saw the line about, your father going to Washington and you might not see him again, I just thought about it, well, like a prosecutor, like a manager. I thought, what damning evidence that is, that people are expecting lethal violence at a protest called by the President of the United States and saying their final goodbyes to their kids. But Hannah,
there he is touching his nose.
thought of it like a human being. She thought of it, if you'll forgive me, like a patriot. Someone who just lost her brother and doesn't want to see any other kids in America go through that kind of agony and grief. Senators, when I say all three of my kids are better than me, you know that I am not engaged in idle flattery. Maybe some of you feel the same way about your kids. They're literally better people than me. They've got a lot of their mom, Sarah Bloom Raskin, in them. They're better.
Nobody cares, buddy.
And Hannah saw through the legality of the situation. She saw through the politics of the situation, all the way to the humanity of the situation, the morality of the situation. That was one of the most patriotic things I ever heard anybody say. The children of the insurrectionists.
More face touching.
Violent and dangerous ones. They're our children too. They are Americans and we must take care of them and their future. We must recognize and exercise these crimes against our nation, and then we must take care of our people and our children, their hearts and their minds. As Tommy Raskin used to say, it's hard to be human. Many of the Capitol and Metropolitan police officers and guardsmen and women who were beaten up by the mob also have kids. You remember Officer Fanone, who had a heart attack after being tased and roughed up for hours by the mob, and then begged for his life, telling the insurrectionists that he had 4 daughters. And that just about broke my heart all over again. We talked about this for a long time last night. My kids felt terrible that other kids' fathers and mothers were pulled into this nightmare by a president of the United States. Senators, we proved he betrayed his country. We proved he betrayed his Constitution. We proved he betrayed his oath of office. The startling thing to recognize now is that he is even betraying the mob. He told them he would march with them, and he didn't. They believed the president was right there with them somewhere in the crowd, fighting the fantasy conspiracy to steal the election and steal their country away from them. They thought they were one big team working together. He told them their great journey together was just beginning, and now there are hundreds of criminal prosecutions getting going all over the country. People getting set to say goodbye to members of their family. And the president who contacted them, solicited them, lured them, invited them, incited them, that president has suddenly gone quiet and dark. Nowhere to be found. He cannot be troubled to come here to tell us what happened and tell us why this was the patriotic and the constitutional thing to do. Senators, this trial,
touch his face.
The final analysis is not about Donald Trump. The country and the world know who Donald Trump is. This trial is about who we are. Who we are.
No, that's not what it's about. You're supposed to prove incitement, idiot.
My friend Dar Williams says that sometimes the truth is like a second chance. We've got a chance here with the truth. Who still believe in the separation of powers? President Trump tried to sideline or run over every other branch of government, thwart the will of the people at the state level, usurp the people's choice for president. This case is about whether our country demands a peaceful, nonviolent transfer of power to guarantee the sovereignty of the people. Are we going to defend the people who defend us? Not just honor them with medals, as you rightfully did yesterday, but actually back them up against savage, barbaric, insurrectionary violence? Will we restore the honor of our capital and the people who work here? Will we be a democratic nation that the world looks to for understanding democratic values and practices and constitutional government and the rights of women and men? Will the Senate condone the President of the United States inciting a violent attack on our chambers, our offices, our staff, and the officers who protect us? When you see the footage of Officer Hodges stuck in the doorway, literally being tortured by the mob, if government did that to you, that would be torture. And when you see that footage and he's shouting in agony for his dear life, it's almost unwatchable. When the Vice President of the United States escapes a violent mob that's entered this Capitol building seeking to hang him and calling out traitor, 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 and when they shut down the counting of the Electoral College votes, is this the future you imagine for our kids? Is it totally appropriate, as we've been told? Or as Representative Cheney said, is it the greatest betrayal of the presidential oath of office in the history of our country? And if we can't handle this together as a people, all of us, forgetting the lines of party and ideology and geography and all of those things, if we can't handle this, how are we ever going to conquer the other crises of our day? Is this America? Is this what we want to bequeath to our children and our grandchildren? I was never a great Sunday school student. Actually, I was pretty truant most of the time.
You're not great at anything.
From the book of Exodus as both beautiful and haunting, even as a kid, after I asked what the words meant. Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil. Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil. The officer who got called the N-word 15 times and spent hours with his colleagues battling insurrectionists who had metal poles and baseball bats and hockey sticks, bear spray, and Confederate battle flags posed the right question to the Senate and to all of us. Is this America? Dear senators, that's going to be up to you now. In whatever committees and subcommittees you're on, whatever you came to Washington to do, to work on, from defense to agriculture to energy to aerospace to healthcare. This is almost certainly how you will be remembered by history. That might not be fair. It really might not be fair, but none of us can escape the demands of history and destiny right now. Our reputations and our legacy will be inextricably intertwined with what we do here and with how you exercise your oath to do impartial justice. Impartial justice. I know and I trust you will do impartial justice, driven by your meticulous attention to the overwhelming facts of the case and your love for our Constitution, which I know dwells in your heart.
Go ahead and cry for us.
The times have found us, said Tom Paine, the namesake of my son. The times have found us. Is this America? What kind of America will we be? It's now literally in your hands. Godspeed to the Senate of the United States.
How old are your kids where you're discussing politics with them?
The House is reserved 28 minutes.
I like how he's like, all right, senators, you can dismiss this circus of a trial, but if you do, you're a bunch of poopy heads and dum-dums. So just know, that's how we'll look at you. Stupid.
I'm talking, and it will not be so long. And before I start my prepared closing, I really want to clean up a few things from the mess that was the closing of the House managers.
Yeah.
I want to ruin my closing because I think the ending's pretty good. What they didn't, they started off by misstating the law, and they started off by misstating the intent of our stipulation. What we did today was stipulate to an article that was published in a magazine. Apparently they've had for weeks, according to the documents they produced today, but for some reason this morning popped up with it. The stipulation was that they can put that in. We did not stipulate to its contents for truthfulness. And they tried to portray that in their closing as the stipulation. The stipulation was read into the record. The proponents of that conversation, the real ones, have denied its content, its veracity. With respect to, and I'm not going to talk much about the tortured analysis of our arson laws that started off, or the truly sideways analogies that were used with fires. What I do want to talk about, though, is the doctoring of evidence. First of all, they sent us their evidence on Tuesday the 9th at 2:32 p.m. by email. I was in this room trying the case already when they sent their evidence. Due process. They used evidence that was flat wrong 2 or 3 nights ago with Senator Lee and had to withdraw it. They tried to use it again today. They tried to use evidence that they had never presented in the case in their closing argument. That is a very desperate attempt by a prosecuting team, 9 of them, by a prosecuting team that knew that their case has collapsed. Their closing did not mention one piece of law. They didn't talk about the Constitution once. They didn't talk about the First Amendment and its application. They didn't talk about due process and how it applies to this proceeding for my client.
That's that without prejudice that I mentioned the day that they struck it from the record. That's why they brought it back. I knew they were going to do that. Stupid people.
basic rule of any court is that when you close a case out, you close on the facts that were admitted in the trial. It's a basic, fundamental principle of due process and fairness. And that was violently breached today on multiple occasions. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why did they resort to those tactics at this moment in time? Senators, good afternoon, Mr. President. What took place here at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th was a grave tragedy. Over the course of this trial, you have heard no one on either side of this debate argue that the infiltration of the Capitol was anything less than a heinous act on the home of American democracy. All of us, starting with my client, are deeply disturbed by the graphic videos of the Capitol attack that have been shown in recent days. The entire team condemned and have repeatedly condemned the violence and law-breaking that occurred on January 6th in the strongest possible terms. We've advocated that everybody be found, punished to the maximum extent of the law. Yet the question before us is not whether there was a violent insurrection of the Capitol. On that point, everyone agrees. Based on the explicit text of the House impeachment article, this trial is about whether Mr. Trump willfully engaged in incitement of violence and even insurrection against the United States. And that question they have posed in their article impeachment has to be set up against the law of this country. No matter how much truly horrifying footage we see of the conduct of the rioters and how much emotion has been injected into this trial, that does not change the fact that Mr. Trump is innocent of the charges against him. Despite all of the video played, at no point in their presentation did you hear the House managers play a single example of Mr. Trump urging anyone to engage in violence of any kind. At no point did you hear anything that could ever possibly be construed as Mr. Trump encouraging or sanctioning an insurrection. Senators, you did not hear those tapes because they do not exist, because the act of incitement never happened. He engaged in no language of incitement whatsoever on January 6th or any other day following the election. No unbiased person honestly reviewing the transcript of Mr. Trump's speech on the ellipse could possibly believe that he was suggesting violence. He explicitly told the crowd that he expected the protest outside the Capitol to be peaceful and patriotic. They claim that's not enough. His entire premise was that the proceedings of the joint session should continue. He spent nearly the entire speech talking about how he believes the senators and members of Congress should vote on the matter. It's the words. The Supreme Court ruled in Brandenburg that there is a very clear standard for incitement. In short, you have to look at the words themselves. The words have to either explicitly or implicitly call for lawlessness or violence. Whether the speech, you have to determine whether the speech was intended to provoke the lawlessness and whether the violence was the likely result of the word itself. They fail on all three prongs. The false and defamatory claim that Mr. Trump gave a speech encouraging his supporters to go attack the Capitol has been repeated so often, uncritically, without any examination of the underlying facts that the Americans listening at home were probably surprised to learn it's not true. Furthermore, some of the people in this room followed Mr. Trump's statements and tweets in the weeks leading up to January 6th very closely. We know that he was not trying to foment an insurrection during the time, because no one, from the Speaker of the House to the Mayor of Washington, D.C., behaved in a fashion consistent with the belief that violence was being advocated for. Mr. Trump did not spend the weeks prior to January 6th inciting violence. He spent those weeks pursuing his election challenge through the court system and other legal procedures, exactly as the Constitution and the Congress prescribe. To believe, based on the evidence you have seen, that Mr. Trump actually wanted and indeed willfully incited an armed insurrection to overthrow the U.S. government would be absurd. The gathering on January 6th was supposed to be an entirely peaceful event. Thousands and thousands of people, including Mr. Trump, showed up that day with that intention. A small percentage, a small fraction of those people then engaged in truly horrible behavior, but as we now know, that those actors were pre-planned and premeditated and acted even before the speech was completed, to which is the basis of the article of impeachment. It was pre-planned and premeditated by fringe, left and right groups. They hijacked the event for their own purposes. The House manager's false narrative is a brazenly dishonest attempt to smear, to cancel constitutional cancel culture, their number one political opponent, taking neutral statements, commonplace political rhetoric, removing words and facts from context, and ascribing to them the most sinister and malevolent intentions possible. Their story was based not on evidence, but on the sheer personal and political animus. The flimsy theory of incitement you heard from the House managers could be used to impeach, indict, or expel countless other political leaders. Many leading figures in other parties have engaged in far more incendiary and dangerous rhetoric. And we played some of it. I'm not going to replay it. I'm not going to replay the words. You all saw the evidence. I'm not going to replay mob scenes. I don't want to give those people another platform, any more view from the American people as to what they did. They should be canceled. Democrat politicians spent months prior to January 6th attacking the very legitimacy of our nation's most cherished institutions and traditions. They didn't just question the integrity of one election, they challenged the integrity of our entire nation. Everything from our founding fathers, our Constitution, Declaration of Independence, law enforcement officers, and United States military. They said that our society was rooted in hatred. They even said that America deserved, and I'll quote, a reckoning. As you heard yesterday, throughout the summer, Democrat leaders, including the current president and vice president, repeatedly made comments that provided moral comfort to mobs attacking police officers. During that time, many officers across the country were injured. As we all know, 2 sheriff's deputies in Los Angeles were ambushed and shot at point-blank range. Members of this very body have been in danger. Senators from Maine to Kentucky and most points in between have been harassed by mobs. Last August, a menacing left-wing mob swarmed Senator Rand Paul and his wife as they left the White House, and they had to be rescued by police. For months, our federal courthouse in Portland was placed under siege by violent anarchists who attacked law enforcement officers daily and repeatedly and tried to set fire to the building. Speaker Pelosi did not call the violent siege of the federal building an insurrection. She called the federal agents protecting the courthouse stormtroopers. The White House complex was besieged by mobs that threw bricks, rocks, and bottles at Secret Service agents, set fire to an historic structure, and breached a security fence to infiltrate the Treasury grounds. When my client's administration sent in the National Guard to secure the nation's capital city amidst the violence, Democrat leaders demanded that the forces be withdrawn. The Washington, D.C. mayor said the presence of the National Guard was an affront to the safety of the district. It must be fully investigated whether political leadership here in Washington, D.C. took an inadequate and irresponsible forced posture on January 6th because of their commitment to the false narrative of what happened last June. Hopefully, we can all now agree that the administration acted properly by taking action to stop a riotous mob, establishing an appropriate security perimeter, and prevent the White House from potentially being overrun. The House managers argued this week that an alleged brief delay in issuing a public statement from Mr. Trump on January 6th was somehow evidence that he committed incitement or supported the violence. Yet for months last year, Joe Biden, Vice President Harris, and countless of other Democrats repeatedly refused to condemn the extremism as riots were occurring daily, as businesses were being ramshackled, as neighborhoods were being burned, as bombs were exploding. They repeatedly refused to tell their violent supporters to stand down. Some even suggested that the mob's actions were justified. Vice President Harris literally urged her followers to donate money to a fund to bail out the violent, extreme rioters so that they could get out and continue to do it over and over again. She later said that those folks were not going to let up and that they should not. All of this was far closer to the actual definition of incitement than anything President Trump has ever said or done, never mind what he said on the 6th. It's a hypocrisy. It's a hypocrisy that the House managers have laid at the feet of this chamber. The House managers suggested in that this recent history is irrelevant to the current proceedings. But not only is Democrats' behavior surrounding last year's riots highly relevant as precedent, and not only does it reveal the dishonesty and insincerity of this entire endeavor, it also provides crucial context that should inform our understanding of the events that took place on January 6th. Many of the people who infiltrated the Capitol took pictures of themselves and posted them on social media. To some, it seems, they thought that it was all a game. They apparently believed that violent mobs, destruction of property, rioting, assaulting police, and vandalizing historic treasures was somehow now acceptable in the United States. Where might they have gotten that idea? I would suggest to you that it was not from Mr. Trump. It was not Mr. Trump. It was not anyone in the Republican Party that spent the 6 months immediately prior to the Capitol assault giving rhetorical aid and comfort to mobs, making excuses for rioters, celebrating radicalism, and explaining that angry, frustrated, and marginalized people were entitled to blow off steam like that. Let me be very clear. There can be no excuse for the depraved actions of the rioters here at the Capitol or anywhere else across this country. 100% of those guilty of committing crimes deserve lengthy prison sentences for their shameful and depraved conduct. But this trial has raised the question about words, actions, and consequences. As a nation, we must ask ourselves, how did we arrive at this place where rioting and pillaging would become commonplace? I submit to you that it was month after month of political leaders and media personalities bloodthirsty for ratings, glorifying civil unrest, and condemning the reasonable law enforcement measures that are required to quell violent mobs. Hopefully, we can all leave this chamber in uniform agreement that all rioting against a disapproved viewpoint. It is an unprecedented action with the potential. Yesterday, we played you a video of countless Democrat members of the Senate urging their support in those things, but because we know you should not be forcibly removed from office for saying those things. But recognize the hypocrisy. Yesterday, in questioning, House Manager Raskin admitted that the House Democrats had invented an entirely new legal. In fact, they've created a new legal theory, the Raskin Doctrine. The Raskin Doctrine is based on nothing more than determining protected speech based on the party label next to your name. Regardless of what you have heard or what you have seen from the House managers, if you pay close attention, you will see that any speech made by Democrat elected officials is protected speech, while any speech made by Republican elected officials is not protected.